I call the opposition spokesperson, James Wilde.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I rise to speak on behalf of the opposition, and particularly to New Clause 8. But let me start briefly by considering the context in which we're debating this bill. It comes after a budget in which the Chancellor said we must have an economy that is growing, creating wealth and opportunity for all. However, Madam Chair, that is not what this finance bill delivers. Instead, the budget is forecast to deliver lower growth, higher borrowing and higher inflation. The Minister referred to choices, and the Government has indeed made choices. They've chosen to tax enterprise, to tax the wealth creators and to tax the farmers who are again outside this place protesting against the family farm tax. And I wonder if the Prime Minister, on one of his rare jaunts to this country, has gone out to speak to them. But rather than promote opportunity, it was their choice to bring in a new tax on aspiration. I will, absolutely.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Minister giving way. When he talks about choices, isn't one of the choices these independent schools are now going to have to make is how they use their own resources, their sports pitches, their bursary scholarships, these kind of things that benefited the wider local community may now have to be turned into fundraising, revenue-making machines to be able to deal with that, which in turn means that other schools will not be able to use that. Community facilities like football pitches, etc., may all be charged more or indeed cut completely as the schools have to make those difficult choices, which isn't good for community cohesion at all.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and I think over the last 14 years that we were in government, one of the things that consecutive education secretaries did was to work with the independent sector precisely to open up those facilities in recognition of the public good that they were delivering and a benefit to their communities.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
Further to the excellent intervention from my honourable friend, this is exactly what happens with schools in my constituency. If you take Haberdasher's School, they partner with 1,400 state school pupils every single week. And when the Minister talks about finding efficiencies, these are exactly the sort of programmes that will suffer. Exactly. And there is no other place for these students to go if they leave schools in my private schools in my constituency. So on both counts, everyone is worse off, and this is one of the iniquities of this policy.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very powerful point, and I think it just reflects the rush nature of this policy and the inadequacy of the impact assessment, that those issues are not even addressed within it. I will give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. And just on the point, you spoke about a tax on aspiration. Sorry, the Shadow Minister spoke about a tax on aspiration. But what is your problem with having aspiration for all children in all of our schools?
Indeed, we're about the 100% of pupils. We're not trying to divide and rule as the party opposite. I'll make a little bit of progress if the honourable gentleman doesn't mind. But sadly, this cruel tax that has been imposed midway through the academic year will damage the education of thousands of pupils. And it's sadly typical of the ideological approach we've seen this new government take on education, where they're trashing the record of schools, pupils, teachers, governors over the last 14 years when we rose up the international league tables. I will.
Given that there are many on the government benches who've had almost as their life's work the destruction of the private school system, is he as shocked as I am that this flagship policy that the red flag has so often demanded is so underpopulated on the government benches? I thought they would be there cheering the Minister on.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and he, I think, will have been here throughout many of the debates we've had on the finance bill and indeed the national insurance, the jobs tax bill, where there were very few honourable members on the benches opposite. Very few made contributions to defend their first budget for 14 years, and I think we all know why. And Clause 47 removes the exemption for private school fees and spells out what Labour's education tax will mean from the 1st of January. As my honourable friend for Hertfordshire has already said, doing this mid-year is a cruel measure. I give way to my...
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend. And further to the point there, I think one of the reasons that there may be so few colleagues opposite is because they actually stood on a manifesto that was all about economic growth, was about protecting farmers, about holding down tax. That's what they stood on. They've turned out they've got this leftist front bench that introduced this pernicious tax midway through the year, and we have an education secretary so filled with malice and spite she can't even bring herself to congratulate the state school which has been #1 in the country 3 years in a row.
Well, my rival friend makes a typically salient point, and I agree particularly about the lack of the congratulations that the Education Secretary was not prepared to make to the head of Michaela School, which is the best performing school in the country. And putting VAT on independent schools will particularly hurt those parents on modest incomes who are saving to send their children to a school that they think will best serve their needs. And none of those parents are getting a tax break. They're also contributing to funding places in the state system, whether or not their child takes one up. The clause does exclude the teaching of English as a foreign language, education in nursery and higher education courses from this new tax. But the government's already crossed the line. It's taxing education and learning for the first time. So will the Minister, when he winds up this debate, rule out widening the scope of this education tax to include university fees, for example? And we on this side are deeply concerned about the impact the tax will have, particularly on pupils with special educational needs, small rural schools, faith schools and schools taking part in the music and dance scheme. And we've consistently warned of the damage this will do to young people's education, and we voted against these measures in the budget resolutions. And new Clause 8, in the name of my honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor, would require the Chancellor, within 6 months of the Act being passed, to make a statement to Parliament about the impact of these changes on those groups in particular, as well as the music and dance scheme. And that's needed because there's such a wide gap between what the Minister's telling us and what their limited impact assessment is saying and what all honourable members who are actually talking to schools and parents know is going to be the case. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
The gentleman talks about talking to schools. I've spoken to schools in my constituency for many years. I'm sure he's spoken to ones in his. The School Cuts website tells us that North West Norfolk has seen a 2.2 million cut in their state schools since 2010. Perhaps he could point to the record where he spoke out against those cuts to those schools.
It says here.
Well, grateful to the honourable gentleman. I think if he checks the record, he'll see that the level of per pupil funding actually increased under the last 14 years. And actually, I congratulate the schools in my constituency who have just received good ratings from Ofsted. A number of them have done so. But there are more than 100,000 pupils. No, I won't at this stage. There are more than 100,000 pupils with SEND in independent schools who don't have education healthcare plans. So they will be subject to this tax. It could make it unaffordable for their parents to send their children to those schools that they think are best looking after them. And there will be demand in places where there is not capacity as a result. A number of local authorities have already pointed that out. And that's just going to make the problems that councils are facing with their SEND budgets, despite the record amounts we put into high needs, that they are facing.
Would my honourable friend agree with me that this disastrous education tax risks a severe impact on those children and pupils with SEND in independent schools, because this will force children with SEND out of independent schools as fees become unaffordable for their parents, and it risks overwhelming the state provision as there isn't sufficient state provision at the moment?
Absolutely. My honourable friend makes the point very well. The knock-on impacts of this and the damage to those children's education is going to be quite considerable. And more than 40% of independent schools are small schools. They're at the heart of their local communities. They don't have big endowments. They operate on wafer-thin margins, and they simply can't absorb the changes of this magnitude. So it's likely that those schools will cut bursary places that exist due to this new tax, which puts their viability at risk. I give way.
On the issue particularly of SEND funding, Madam Chair, the East Riding of Yorkshire is the lowest funded local authority for SEND per pupil. And children in the Prime Minister's constituency get 3 times more funding than do in my own, which I think is a travesty in itself. So this policy is going to put even more strain on my local authority and the children who desperately need support from that local council.
Absolutely. I completely agree with my honourable friend. I think this cloak that the government hide behind, that if you've got an EHCP, everything's okay. There's 100,000 children in schools across our country who are going to be impacted by this. The next area we're concerned about is around faith schools, which tend to be smaller and charge lower fees, and the Independent Schools Council has warned that low-cost faith schools will be faced with deficit and closure, and communities will lose access to their assets. There are small religious groups who don't have any state sector provision that can meet their needs as a denomination, and religious groups are mounting legal challenges as a result, battling for the right to educate their children and battling for the right to choose, which we on this side of the House certainly support. And New Clause 8, Section 3 also refers to the Music and Dance Scheme, which provides grants to talented young people who could not otherwise attend world-class institutions like the Royal Ballet School. And whilst we do welcome the government's decision under pressure to delay taxing schools in this scheme until September next year, that exemption should be made permanent. And to return to one of the points that's made, in the budget statement, the Chancellor said 94% of children in the UK attend state schools. To provide the highest quality support and teaching that they deserve, we will introduce VAT on private school fees. That is a deliberately divisive approach. On this side, we support 100% of pupils. We care about all children. We simply believe parents should be able to choose. We've also consistently raised the situation of military families, which the Minister referred to, and have argued that they should be exempt from this tax, which the government did not agree to. But in response to our campaign, the government said we will uprate the continuity of education allowance to reflect the increase in school fees from January. Well, Madam Chair, the new CA allowances have been announced, and as my honourable friend for Solihull and West Shirley has pointed out, they fall short of protecting service families from these changes. That will have a direct impact on the retention and recruitment of our armed forces. There are 4,200 children who benefit from this, and they're in place to meet the needs of the armed forces when people have to move around the country or serve overseas, and boarding schools and other provision is the only available option. So given the importance of this allowance for retention of military personnel, why has the government not met the commitment that it made to our armed forces?
Hear, hear.
I'm very grateful to the many organisations who... Absolutely.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister giving way. Does he think that the new Veterans Commissioner that's coming in under the new government would be primed perfectly to look at this kind of issue to make sure that both sides of the department, the Defence Department and the Education Department, get the best? Because isn't that what it's there to do, the Commissioner, to look at these kind of problems?
Well, I very much hope so. And I know from my 3 years in the Ministry of Defence as an advisor just how important this allowance is for that retention, and that's why the government breaking its promise is so disappointing. And I'm grateful to the many organisations who've shared concerns about implementation in these clauses, particularly as it is rushed and is taking effect mid-school year. The Chartered Institute for Taxation has called for a delay, saying they're concerned that neither HMRC nor private schools will be ready to implement the change in VAT liability effectively. In order to meet the mid-term deadline, the HMRC has to register these schools in just 5 working weeks, issues that the new Clause 8 could address. I believe someone was trying to intervene.
I would like to start by saying how deeply grateful I am to the Secretary of State for providing the money to rebuild Tiverton High School in my constituency. It's been a 20-year campaign, and I am genuinely grateful. I'd also like to disassociate myself from some of the comments made by my colleagues to my right. Some of them are personalised and vituperative, and I would not wish to be associated with them. That said, I have Tiverton with...
To be on point and to ask a question.
Blundell School is in my constituency in Tiverton. Would the honourable member be surprised to hear that when canvassing in Tiverton, in areas that might be considered relatively poor, there were numerous grandparents who were saving up money every month to help their children pay for a better future for their children at Blundell School through bursaries?
Absolutely, I completely agree with the point the honourable member makes. It's families who come together who help out to fund the place for a child, for a grandchild, to give them the best chance in life. And we're not going to criticise people who make that choice. Unfortunately, the government is singling them out with this vindictive measure. This change also represents a significant complication to the tax system, and even HMRC seems confused. The VAT registration for private schools guidance has had 7 technical updates since it was published. There's confusion has been referred to about what closely related supply actually means. Wait for my honourable friend. Right
on the subject of confusion, he will have noticed the honourable member opposite, who seems not to have noticed that tampons had VAT removed from them on the 1st of January 2021 by the previous Conservative government. Is my honourable friend, like me, hopeful that that honourable member, however ignorant of changes in our tax law, may join us in the lobbies tonight to oppose this pernicious policy, because that would be consistent with the views he tried to espouse a little earlier?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and we can but hope that the honourable member will join us tonight in the lobbies, and also that he will one day develop the attuned knowledge my honourable friend has about the tax system and the changes that came in the last parliamentary session. As I was saying, the Association of Schools and College Leaders have also said that there's increased anxiety amongst school leaders who are having to deal with this change in the middle of the academic year. Madam Deputy Chair, this is the first time an education tax has been introduced, and that's why we need to oppose it and to review its impact. The government's very limited assessment estimates that there will be an increase of 37,000 pupils coming into the state sector at a cost of £270 million per year. It also concedes there will be a loss of places equivalent to 100 independent schools closing over the next 3 years, above that would otherwise be predicted. That impact assessment is thin, their consultation was flawed. The new education tax is damaging and unfair.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way tomorrow.
Well, my honourable friend is making an excellent speech. I would say, further to the point that he's made about the impact of this, the government's impact assessment assumes that the closure of places and the loss of places is uniformly spread across the country. That will not be the case. There are many constituencies, particularly Conservative constituencies represented by Conservatives, where there are large numbers of students who are in private schools, and when those places are lost, it will have a significant impact on local schools where there are not the places to absorb them.
My honourable friend has his finger right on the pulse. The government claims there are lots of places, but they are not in the places where they will be needed. We've had Hertfordshire, Worcestershire, Buckinghamshire, other areas already pointing out the problems and the concerns that they have. So this education tax is damaging and unfair. We oppose it, and our new clause would ensure the true consequences of this tax on aspiration become clear. Thank you.